In this video, I want to share 5 steps to help you with overcoming your fears, and each step gets progressively better and will have a greater impact to help you with overcoming whatever's holding you back in life. So in this video, I want to firstly take some time to define what is fear, the costs of letting fears hold you back, the benefits you're going to experience when you actually overcome your fears. I'm going to use some analogies, some metaphors, some stories, and then we're going to get into the 5 steps. So firstly, what is fear? The way I define fear is it's you perceiving through your senses or through your imagination that something negative is going to happen to you in the future. Now, when it comes to fear, there's a quote by Seneca, he's a philosopher, and he says that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And when it comes to fear, what I've found is we tend to make our fears, those worries, those negative things we think is going to happen to us in the future, we make them a lot more bigger than they actually are. And I think the reason for that is we've basically got 2 parts of the brain. We've got the prefrontal cortex. So this is basically where we're doing all the thinking. This is commonly known as the executive center. This is where we're most objective, rational. We make all the best sort of decisions. And then we've got what's known as the monkey mind, or the actual name is called the amygdala. This is basically the most primitive part of the brain. And this is where we make sometimes the worst decisions because it's purely out of fight or flight. It's basically the survival part of our brain. And it's just making sure that we don't die. And back in the day when there's saber-toothed tigers and you'd see that, you get all the adrenaline coming in, the fight or flight activates because we want to get away from that. We will fear the saber-toothed tiger because if we don't fear it, we're going to die. So fear's a really important thing. And back in the day, it's what helped us survive. But in this day and age, we don't really have saber-toothed tigers. We don't have these immediate threats, which is going to kill us and threaten our survival. But this thing, this amygdala, can really hijack our decision-making and really impact us in terms of becoming who we want to become and doing the things we want to do in our life. And when it comes to fears, the costs of fear, if you let that hold you back, is firstly, it really limits your growth. It really limits the potential that you can achieve and fulfill in your life. And you also miss out on a lot of opportunities by just standing still. There's a quote where it basically says that many false steps were made by standing still. So, a lot of the ways we go wrong in life is just by not doing anything, purely out of fear. And because of that, because we're not seizing these opportunities and we're missing out, we're basically missing out on a whole load of potential and becoming who we could potentially become in life and achieving our greatest sort of vision of who we could be. And then when you get older, you have lots of regrets. And in the meantime, because you're not actually doing the things you want to do and being who you want to be, you're just not that happy. People go through life depressed. What I found when you actually overcome your fears is, well, you are taking advantage of those opportunities when they come around. You're actually taking action. And because of that, you're growing and you're actually starting to become who you want to become. And, that's where you start really making progress and you really start seeing some crazy changes in your life. And you're not going to have those regrets. You're not going to be living in this, I wish I did this, I wish I did that. And you're just beating yourself up. You're just a lot more happier and fulfilled. So when it comes to fear, there's 3 common mistakes which I've made and I see a lot of people make when it comes to allowing fear to hold them back in life. And the first one, the big one, is actually not doing anything about them. It's sort of, we know what they are and they're there in our mind, but we're not actually addressing them. We're kind of just avoiding them and we're just sort of letting it run our lives. So that's the first mistake, is actually not doing anything about them, because you can do something about your fears, and we're obviously going to talk about that. But the big thing I found is a lot of people, a lot of individuals, and when I was younger, still do this now, is focusing on the negative outcome. So, there's this thing we want to do, but then, what if this happens? And it's focusing on the negative. And we're totally overlooking and we're totally just missing the positives we can get from doing this thing. And we just solely focus on the fear, the negative thing, what we think is going to happen to us. And we let that impact our decision making. And, when you focus on the positives and the positives outweigh the negatives, that's when you take action. But solely just focusing on the negatives is why you don't do anything. And the third thing when it comes to fear is actually not understanding the root cause. Where's that fear actually coming from? Why do you actually have that fear? Because when you don't understand fear and understand where it comes from, it's really hard to actually do something about it. So in this video, let's get into the actual steps. 5 practical steps you can take to help you with overcoming your fear. So the first step is actually defining your fear. And here's the first thing which I hear a lot, and it's a load of bullshit. People say, I have a fear of the unknown. I just fear the unknown and it's scary. No, you don't. That's a load of BS. You only have a fear of what's the content of your mind. So as I said before, fear is you perceiving or imagining through your senses that something negative is going to happen to you in the future. So what you want to do is you actually want to define what you perceive negative is going to happen to you in the future. So a way to sort of prompt this is think about that thing you really want to do. If it's a goal or a dream or it's a certain action which you know is really going to help you, but you're procrastinating, you're hesitating on it due to fear. Think about the thing you want to do, and then think about, if I do this thing, or if I don't do this thing, what's the fear associated with it? What's the negative thing I perceive is going to happen to me if I do this thing? And you'll notice that there's no fear of the unknown. You'll have very specific negative things which you're worried about. It could be I'm scared of failing, or I'm worried about people criticizing me or judging me or saying certain things. I'm worried that people are going to sort of reject me and I'm going to be sort of like an outcast. It could be I'm worried about losing money, or, you know, my reputation's going to be impacted, whatever. Those are really specific. You're not fearing the unknown. You're going to have very specific worries based on who you are and your experiences, which I'll get into in the last step. So yeah, the first step is define the fear. When I do the thing I really want to do, what am I worried about? What's the negative thing I perceive is going to happen to me? That's step one. Because what I found in coaching is when you actually define the fear or define the problem, a problem well defined is a problem half solved. So you're halfway there by actually just getting rid of, oh, it's this unknown thing and it's scary. It's actually getting really specific and tangible. The second step is actually defining the worst case scenario. So for me, 2020, I'm in Perth, I'm in Western Australia, and I really want to do this. I'm not making videos, but I really want to help people. I really want to start making videos and putting myself out there. But what comes up is, or what's holding me back is fear. And specifically, it was fear of people basically criticizing me and judging me and saying certain things. And I really cared about the opinions of others. And so what I did was I defined, well, this is what it is. I'm worried about people messaging me and pulling me down. And then what I did was I actually started to really future pace, and I really started to define, well, who are those people I'm worried about? Because I'm not worried about everyone. There's only certain people who I'm worried about. And when I actually did the exercise, it was only 2 people who I used to work with. And I really started to get real. I was like, okay, so worst case scenario, let's say these people actually message me, because I'm on my own here in Western Australia. Let's say these people actually message me. What's the worst case scenario? They're going to say a few things. They're going to make some comments. And then what? They can't really do much else. All they can do is just say certain things or gossip about me. That's fine. That's probably going to take up a few minutes of their day, and then they're going to get on with their life. They're not going to make it their mission to sort of hate me forever. They're just going to say a comment and that's it. And I'll deal with it. I'll get on with it. And I really just sort of defined the worst case scenario, and I put pen to paper, and I really recommend you do that. Actually defining the worst case scenario. Because what's probably happened is whatever that thing is which is holding you back, and you actually take the time to really flush out on paper, not in your head, because when you leave it in your head, it's actually a lot more worse. But when you put it on paper and you try and get objective rather than subjective, you're actually just going to see this fear for what it is. And you're like, am I really letting this hold me back? Because when you just put everything you can on there, probably not going to be as bad as you initially thought. So I find the second thing is just really thinking about the worst case scenarios with this fear and really actually getting real can really help you calm down and actually make it seem not so big as you previously thought it was going to be. The third step, once you've done those things, is doing something called risk management. Now, a massive shout out to one of my mentors back in the day. His name's Lewis Mocker, and he was a financial trader, and he had a similar process with fears, overcoming fears. And what he gave me was two things. He basically says you want to manage the risk of that fear coming true. And so the first thing he said was, it's basically reducing the probability of that fear coming true. So because a lot of people, when they have fears, it's this thing which they perceive as outside of their control and they can't do anything about it. And they don't know about it, the fear of the unknown. And when it's not in their control, well, they just try and avoid it because that's what's in their control. But rather than avoiding it, actually get real and define the fear like we've done, and then actually get clear on what can you do to reduce the probability of the fear coming true. So for example, if you're worried about something negative happening to you, like people criticizing you, what could you do to reduce the probability of that happening? Could you make videos which are actually just you sharing your experiences? Could it just maybe be you actually being better able to speak on camera if it's like me? Or let's say you have a fear about losing money, for example. Well, could it be a case of actually really researching and understand what you're about to do so you're actually less likely to lose money because you know what you're doing? I don't know, but it's basically whatever the fear is, what can you do to actually stop that fear from coming true, or at least just try and put all the chips in your side of the table to reduce the probability of that fear coming true and actually put it in your control. That's the first thing he taught me, which is basically reducing the probability. The second thing is actually reducing the impact of that fear. So what he basically taught me was, if the fear actually comes true, actually having a contingency plan where you can reduce the impact of it. So let's say it's the fear, if it happens, you're really fearful it's just going to absolutely destroy your life. Well, what could you do now where if the worst case scenario actually happens, that the impact to you is not so bad? So let's say for me, if those individuals, they reach out to me and they start criticizing me, what can I do where it doesn't really impact me as much? Could I maybe do some work on myself? Could I really start building my self-worth? Could I maybe start being more resilient so it doesn't even bother me, for example? I don't know. With you, a big one, if people when they fear losing their jobs or, they're going to get fired or made redundant and stuff, a big one is they fear, well, the financial stress, what's going to come from that. And when I used to do money coaching, a big thing is, well, why don't you just build up a safety net of cash? I call it a cash cushion. So if you lost your job, you've got a few months of time. So that impact of losing your job isn't going to impact you as much. So the third step is risk management. So reduce the probability of that fear coming true. What can you do? But if that fear does come true, how can you reduce the impact that fear is going to have on you? The fourth step, this is called flooding in psychology, or I also have called it the Nike strategy. And the Nike slogan is just do it. So whatever you're fearing, just do it. So I remember in school when I did psychology, what they basically talked about was to help people overcome their phobias. Sometimes it's a very extreme thing in this day and age. It's probably not going to happen, but they would just lock people in a room with that thing they're fearing. And initially they're just absolutely terrified. Their heart's racing and they're in that fight or flight state. But basically the way it works is when you realize, this thing isn't actually hurting me or doing anything to me, and you're locked in there for a good amount of time, your body will naturally start to calm itself down. And what you're doing is you're starting to form new associations with that thing you're fearing. And it's not just this totally negative thing you want to avoid. And you start forming more positive associations, and that just helps you not be so scared of the thing, fear the thing. And so in real life, just do it. Because as I said before, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And when you actually go do the thing, oftentimes it's nowhere near as bad as you thought it was going to be. When I did bungee jumping in New Zealand a few months ago, I was scared shitless. My heart was racing. But then I just was like, I'm going to do it. And when I did it and I overcame that fear, I could have easily done it again. And whenever I do it again, I've got this sort of experience there. It's just the first time's a little bit hard. So sometimes the step is just actually doing the thing, getting that experience, and actually realizing it's nowhere near as bad as you're making it out to be. So just do it. There's a quote before I move on to the last step by Mark Twain. And it's something along the lines of, I've had many worries in my life, but most of which have never happened. So, do the thing and see how you go. Now, the last step, this is the fifth and final step. If you've done all 4 steps and you still just can't do it, or you're still terrified in that first experience when you tried it in step 4, can't do that again. You have this absolutely crippling fear. You have a phobia maybe, or maybe you have anxiety. This is where you're probably going to need some help doing the deeper work. Step 5 is actually looking at where does this fear come from. So let me use an analogy. Let me use like a sort of a metaphor. So imagine you go to a dog shelter and you go in and you see this dog and you really like the look of it and you're like, I think I want to adopt it. And as you're sort of getting closer and closer to this dog, the dog sort of sees you and it just starts shaking. And as you get closer and closer, it just starts like absolutely shaking. Why do you think that dog is shaking? Why does this dog have a fear of you? Well, you can probably assume that maybe when the dog was younger, somewhere in its past, maybe it got abused. Maybe there was a human and it beat the dog. I don't know. But that's pretty common. That's why those dogs are in those shelters, because they get abandoned or they get sort of abused and things like that. And so this dog, back in the day, it went through something negative. It suffered a lot of trauma or pains, and it associated that with the owner. And so some dogs, some people, like the dogs are fine around women, but when there's men, they get really scared of them because maybe the owner was a male. And so basically the dog has a fear of this person because it reminds them of the person who used to beat them. And they want to avoid this person because they don't want to get beaten again. It's fear. And it might sound really obvious when I put it like that, but that's the point, is usually we have a fear of something. So we can have a fear of failure because we failed before in the past. And there was a lot of negativity. There was a lot of pain. There was a lot of drawbacks. There was a lot of negative consequences of that thing. And naturally, as a human being, we want to avoid things we perceive as negative. And so you're fearing failure because you failed in the past and you don't want that to happen again. Hence why you avoid the thing you're trying to do because you don't want to fail. Or maybe you have a fear of criticism or being ridiculed because that's happened to you in the past. You fear losing money because something around money happened to you in the past, which you perceive as negative. And that's where you want to actually go back and define, where does this fear come from, and doing something about it. And this is where you're probably going to want to get some kind of assistance with changing the associations you have with these previous memories, these moments in your life, which are reminding you of this thing you're avoiding. So for example, I was working with a client, and my client had an ideal outcome of wanting to authentically express themselves. Kind of wanted to do something similar here, but with a different sort of venture. And they just really weren't doing that. And so I basically asked, well, what's holding you back? What do you perceive is going to happen to you if or when you authentically express yourself? Well, I'm really worried I'm just going to be criticized. I really don't want that to happen to me. Okay, so we defined that the fear is actually being criticized and being sort of brought down when they authentically express themselves. So I said, go to a moment where and when you perceive that's happened to you. Go to a moment where you authentically expressed yourself and you got criticized, you got brought down, and there's a lot of pain and hurt around that. My client straight away brings up a moment when they were like in school, like 5 or 6, and basically with their parents, my client was doing a homework task, and it was basically writing about their parents, and my client basically wrote a story about what was actually happening at home, which wasn't too great for what most people would say. It was a lot of pain and hurt and a lot of things going on, and just innocently wrote about their parent and how it actually was, and showed the homework to their parent. The parent read it, and the parent is basically reading the truth. This is what's actually happening. And that really triggered and upset the parent, because it's sort of being shown a mirror of this is who you are and what you're doing. And the parent just went absolutely apeshit and just started really criticizing this 5-6-year-old individual at the time. And obviously as a 5 and 6-year-old, when you're getting absolutely shouted at and criticized and someone's coming down you like a ton of bricks, it's probably going to have a lot of pain and negativity and associations with that, which you don't want to happen to you ever again. And so no wonder my client had a fear of being criticized and being brought down on when they authentically express themselves, because it happened to them in the past and they don't want that to happen again. Avoidance. I hope this makes sense. And so that's the first thing, is actually going back to where does it come from, but then it's actually doing something about it, which very simply is changing the associations with that event. So my client had a lot of pain, a lot of negativity, a lot of drawbacks associated with that event. And so what I do as a coach is I basically start to associate new positive associations with that event. So basically what I do is I just ask a very simple question and ask, what were the benefits to you in that moment and from that moment until today? And we just start asking, and we start coming up with new positive associations until the pains equal the pleasures, until the negatives equal the positives. And this isn't easy, it takes time. But once we got there, and this isn't something which my client perceived as painful and something negative which they wanted to avoid, and just saw it as something neutral, there was positive and negative, and it's not something I actually want to avoid. If anything, when I get criticism, I can see it's actually a good thing too. I actually get a lot from it. It helps me grow and become a certain person. Once we basically started to do that and change the associations, that changed the associations with the fear in the present, in terms of when I authentically express myself, I'm not too scared of criticism. And guess what? They started to do the venture, do the thing they've always wanted to do, because the criticism isn't something they're worried about, because we changed those associations. And so if you've got a really big fear, maybe you've done these steps and there's still something holding you back, and you'd like some help with that, maybe let me know. Shoot me a comment. I've also got a coaching waitlist where you could maybe put your fear into that form. And when I have coaching spots available, we can maybe have a discussion about it, see if we're a fit to work together, and see if there is something I can help you with. But that's it. That's it. Those are the 5 steps. This was a bit of a longer video, but I really hope that these 5 steps and these analogies and things I've talked about were useful and valuable and insightful for you. I hope maybe a few things have clicked. And, the key here with fear is there's one thing actually intellectually understanding this, but there's a whole other thing actually doing the work, doing these things, because it's worked for me, it's worked for my clients, and I'm sure if you actually do something about it, it can help you too. So if you like this video, please leave a like. That really helps me out, and it really lets YouTube know that this video was useful, and it pushes it out to more people and helps me help other people as well. So please like this video. And if you want to see more videos like this, I don't plan on stopping. I'm going to make more videos similar to this in the future to really help you overcome whatever's holding you back and start helping you become the person which you really want to become in life and doing the things you really want to do in life. So if you want to see more videos, make sure you hit the subscribe button. And lastly, I'd really love to hear, what did you find most insightful? What did you find most valuable? What did you find most useful from this video? Whatever that is, please leave a comment. I'd love to hear it. But that's it. I hope this video was valuable. Thank you for watching if you've gotten this far, and I'll see you in the next video.